So, let me get this straight. The modern Republican, he stands before us, chest puffed out, proclaiming with the fervor of a revival preacher, there is no systemic racism. It's a liberal myth, a fabrication, a tool of the woke mob. And yet, in the very next breath, he thunders, the Democrats, with their 1994 crime bill, they destroyed the black family. Planned Parenthood, they are running a genocide out of their clinics, targeting black neighborhoods. Now, folks, am I the only one who sees the colossal, the asterisk monumental asterisk disconnect here? You tell me, how can there be asterisk no asterisk systemic racism when the very policies you decry are said to have had such devastating, racially disproportionate effects? Is it magic? Did these policies, like the 1994 crime bill, somehow single out black communities for mass incarceration by pure, coincidental happenstance? Did Planned Parenthood, by some bizarre twist of fate, just happen to place many of their clinics in areas densely populated by African Americans? They want it both ways. They want to absolve the system of any inherent bias, of any lingering stain from our nation's troubled past, and simultaneously, they want to wield the very real, very tangible consequences of those policies as a cudgel against their political opponents. It's like arguing that a forest fire couldn't possibly be caused by arson, even as you point to the gasoline can and the singed matchbook. This almost seems like evangelicals and Republicans are actually agreeing with atheists and arguing for a big bang of sorts that self-formed the racially targeted structures they blame the Democrats for being the party of. In this instance, evangelicals affirm it as unintelligent design. They say, oh, it was just bad policy, unintended consequences. But, my friends, when those unintended consequences consistently, relentlessly, and predictably fall upon one specific group, are we to believe it's merely a series of unfortunate coincidences? Or perhaps, is it a pattern that suggests, dare I say, a systemic issue, and then they'll counter. But the Democrats, they held the presidency half the time, as if simply pointing out the shared culpability somehow absolves them of the present contradiction. It's like two men robbing a bank, and one saying, well, he took half the money, so I'm not responsible for the whole thing. No, my friends, you were both in the bank. And let's not forget the historical amnesia. They speak of the 1994 crime bill as if it were some isolated, out of the blue act of democratic malevolence. But where did those tough on crime policies come from? They didn't spring from thin air. They were the culmination of decades of a law and order rhetoric, a rhetoric that often, shall we say, had a certain racialized asterisk undertone. So, the Republican narrative, as it stands, is a house built on sand. It crumbles under the weight of its own internal contradictions. They cannot, with any intellectual honesty, decry the racial consequences of democratic policies while simultaneously denying the existence of the very system that made those consequences possible. It just doesn't add up. It's illogical. It's, dare I say, asterisk irrational asterisk. And let's dig deeper, shall we? Let's peel back the layers of this Republican narrative and expose the contradictions that lie festering beneath. They tell us, with a straight face, systemic racism, a liberal fantasy. And yet, they rail against the 1994 crime bill, the very legislation that, according to the Sentencing Project, led to a disproportionate increase in the incarceration of African Americans. The color of justice, racial and ethnic disparity in state prisons, https://www.google.com/search, Q equals https://www.sentencingproject.org/publication/color justice racial and ethnic disparity state prison/. They claim it was just tough on crime. But what does that mean in practice? It meant mandatory minimum sentences that, as the United States Sentencing Commission found, resulted in black offenders receiving sentences nearly 20% longer than white offenders for comparable crimes. Report to the Congress, mandatory minimum penalties in the federal criminal justice system, https://www.google.com/search, Q equals https://www.gov/sites/default/file/pdf/congressional and public affairs/congressional report/201,110 Manman report, PDF. Coincidence? I think not. And then, they point fingers at Planned Parenthood, shouting black genocide. They cite Margaret Sanger's eugenic views, ignoring the fact, as NPR has reported, that scholars say Sanger's focus was on public health, not race. Fact check, was Planned Parenthood started to control the black population? https://www.npr.org/section/its-politics/2,015/8/432-80520/fact check, was Planned Parenthood started to control the black population? And while the Guttmacher Institute shows that fewer than 10% of all abortion providers are in majority black neighborhoods, it is undeniable that a marked number of Planned Parenthood clinics are located in the most densely populated black neighborhoods, creating a perception of targeting. This perception, whether accurate or not, adds fuel to the fire of these claims. Claim that most abortion clinics are located in black or Hispanic neighborhoods is false. https://www.guttmacher.org/claim most abortion clinics are located black or Hispanic neighborhoods false. They want to have it both ways. They want to condemn the asterisk effects of these policies, the disproportionate incarceration, the alleged targeting of black communities, while simultaneously denying the asterisk existence of the system that produced those effects. It's like a doctor diagnosing a patient with a disease, but then insisting the disease doesn't exist. They say it's about intent. But as the Equal Justice Initiative has demonstrated, the legacy of racial bias in the criminal justice system is not about individual prejudice, but about systemic structures. Racial justice, https www.google.com/search Q equals https://ig org/issues/racial justice/. It's about the very foundation upon which our institutions were built, a foundation that, as Ta-Nehisi Coates so eloquently argued, still bears the weight of our nation's original sin. The case for reparations, https://www.theatlantic.com/magazine/archive/2014/6/the case for reparations/361,631/. They claim the Democrats held power half the time, as if that absolves them of the general environment that allowed these policies to flourish. But the center on budget and policy priorities reminds us racial disparities are deeply embedded in our economic and social systems, regardless of which party is in power. Our policies produce racial inequity. https://www.google.com/search Q equals https://www.cbpp.org/research/poverty and inequality/how policies produce racial inequity. The system, my friends, transcends party lines. And let's not forget the selective memory. They'll criticize the 1994 crime bill, but ignore the legacy of tough on crime policies that began long before. Policies that, as Michelle Alexander documents in The New Jim Crow, created a system of mass incarceration that has effectively replaced Jim Crow. The New Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness, https://newjimcrow.com/. So, this Republican narrative, it's a house of cards, built on a foundation of willful ignorance and convenient amnesia. They want to decry the racial consequences of policies while denying the very existence of the system that made those consequences inevitable. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to condemn the fire, but deny the arson. It's not just illogical, it's an insult to the very notion of intellectual honesty. And let's be crystal clear, folks. This whole debate about the 1994 crime bill, about Planned Parenthood's clinics, these are mild examples, the asterisk tip of the iceberg asterisk, compared to the vast, sprawling, and deeply entrenched history of systemic racism that has plagued North America and Europe for centuries. We're talking about a legacy that stretches back to the very dawn of the transatlantic slave trade, a system built on the brutal exploitation and dehumanization of millions. We're talking about centuries of legal and social structures designed to maintain white supremacy, from the black codes that followed the Civil War, designed to restrict the freedoms of newly emancipated slaves, to the Jim Crow laws that enforce segregation and discrimination throughout the South. We're talking about the systematic disenfranchisement of black voters, the denial of basic civil rights, and the constant threat of violence and terror. And let's not forget the redlining policies that denied black families access to housing and economic opportunities, the very policies that Richard Rothstein documented in The Color of Law, which created segregated neighborhoods and perpetuated inequality for generations. The Color of Law, a forgotten history of how our government segregated America, https://www.epi.org/publication/The Color of Law, a forgotten history of how our government segregated America/ We're talking about the eugenics movement, which, as documented by scholars like Edwin Black, sought to promote the superior white race and suppress the reproduction of those deemed undesirable. Or against the weak, eugenics and America's campaign to create a master race, https://www.google.com/search Q equals https://www.amazon.com/war against weak eugenics America/DP/786,868,789. And let's not forget the pervasive, insidious nature of racial bias in the criminal justice system, a system that, as Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative has shown, has consistently treated black defendants more harshly than white defendants. Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption, https://www.google.com/search Q equals https://ig org/book/just mercy/. So, when Republicans talk about the 1994 crime bill or Planned Parenthood, they are talking about recent manifestations of a much older, much deeper problem. They're talking about the echoes of a system that has been designed to oppress and marginalize black people for centuries. It's like complaining about a few cracks in the foundation of a house that's been slowly sinking into a swamp for generations. And they want to pretend this history doesn't exist. They want to ignore the very structures that have created the inequalities we see today. They decry the consequences of policies while denying the roots. It's not just intellectually dishonest. It's a profound act of historical amnesia. These modern arguments are a distraction, a way to avoid the larger conversation, a way to avoid the uncomfortable truth that systemic racism is not a relic of the past, but a living, breathing reality that continues to shape our society. So, let's not be fooled by their rhetorical sleight of hand. Let's not allow them to minimize the gravity of the problem. Let's call out their contradictions and demand they confront the full, unvarnished truth about our nation's history and its ongoing legacy. And let's be crystal clear, my friends. We're not talking about a secular phenomenon. We're talking about a system of oppression that was often sanctioned by religious institutions, justified by theological interpretations, and perpetuated by those who claim to speak for God. As Dennis Prager himself has pointed out, the worst sin is committing evil in God's name. And tragically, that sin has been committed time and time again in the context of racial oppression. From the curse of Ham, twisted and contorted to justify the enslavement of Africans, to the theological justifications for Jim Crow segregation, the stain of racism runs deep within the history of Christianity. And yes, within segments of Judaism, Mormonism, and other faiths as well. We're talking about doctrines of innate infant African inferiority that were platformed, as we must acknowledge, by segments of Protestantism, Catholicism, Mormonism, and even Judaism. Doctrines that seep into the very fabric of society, shaping laws, influencing public opinion, and justifying unspeakable acts of violence. They want to talk about the 1994 crime bill. They want to talk about Planned Parenthood. Those are mere echoes of a much louder, much more sinister symphony of racial oppression. A symphony conducted, in part, by those who claim to be instruments of divine will. And let's not pretend this is ancient history. The legacy of these doctrines, the residue of these beliefs, continues to shape our society today. It's in the implicit biases that permeate our institutions, in the racial disparities that persist in our criminal justice system, in the very air we breathe. They say it's about intent, but as Prager himself argues, it's not enough to claim good intentions. When the asterisk results are evil, when the asterisk consequences are devastating, we must confront the reality of our actions. And they want to pretend this history doesn't exist. They want to ignore the role that religious institutions played in perpetuating these injustices. They want to sanitize the past to absolve themselves of responsibility. No, my friends, we cannot allow them to rewrite history. We cannot allow them to erase the stain of racism that runs so deep within our society. We must confront the truth, however uncomfortable it may be. We must acknowledge the role that religious institutions played in perpetuating these injustices. And we must work to dismantle the systems of oppression that continue to perpetuate racial inequality today. Because, as Prager reminds us, goodness in God's name is theism's best friend. And until we confront the evil that has been done in God's name, we cannot claim to be instruments of true goodness. We cannot claim to be a nation that truly lives up to its ideals. And let's be absolutely clear, folks. This whole notion that these racially disproportionate outcomes, these devastating impacts on black communities, are merely a series of unfortunate coincidences. It's asinine. It's preposterous. It's akin to those who, with a straight face, assert that the universe, in all its complex, intricate, and often brutal glory, originated by unintelligent design. Yes, you heard me right. They want us to believe that the 1994 crime bill, with its mandatory minimums and its funding for mass incarceration, just happened to disproportionately target black Americans. That Planned Parenthood, with its clinics strategically placed in densely populated black neighborhoods, just happened to create the perception of a targeted genocide. That the centuries of redlining, segregation, and systemic discrimination all just happened to fall upon one particular group. It's like saying that a hurricane, with its devastating winds and torrential rains, just happened to form a perfect, swirling pattern by sheer accident. That complex ecosystem, with its delicate balance of predator and prey, just happened to arise from a random explosion. They want us to believe in an racism by coincidence a system of oppression that somehow, miraculously, consistently, and predictably targets black communities without any intentionality, without any underlying bias, without any systemic design. It's the ultimate act of intellectual contortion, a desperate attempt to reconcile their denial of systemic racism with the undeniable reality of its consequences. And just like those who cling to the notion of an unintelligent design of the universe, they ignore the overwhelming evidence that contradicts their worldview. They ignore the mountains of research, the historical records, the lived experiences of millions of black Americans. They ignore the very patterns that reveal the insidious nature of systemic racism. They want us to believe in an racism by coincidence a system that functions with the same level of chaotic, random, and ultimately destructive efficiency as a universe cobbled together by chance. It's an insult to our intelligence. It's an insult to the memory of those who have suffered under the weight of racial oppression. And just as we reject the notion of an unintelligent design of the universe, we must reject this notion of racism by coincidence . We must acknowledge the intentionality, the systemic nature, the deeply rooted biases that have shaped our society. We must confront the reality of our past and present, and we must work to dismantle the systems of oppression that continue to perpetuate racial inequality. Because, my friends, the universe and our society are not products of random chance. They are products of design, of intention, of power. And until we acknowledge the design of our racial inequalities, we cannot begin to dismantle them.